It's 1948. After dominating the sport of boxing, the iconic Joe Louis decided to hang up his gloves and stepped into the business realm. His vision? To launch a Ford car dealership, bringing a symbol of American craftsmanship to the Black community. But Louis had one more insidious opponent to face: the harsh reality of racism. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at OneMikeHistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. Ford seemed like a perfect fit for Joe Louis, a man who had spent his entire life smashing racial barriers and setting records. So he reached out to none other than Henry Ford II, hoping that his legendary status and the Ford name would create a winning combination. But at Ford's headquarters, letters and memos flew back and forth. Behind the polished exterior and welcoming smiles laid a stark reality, hidden beyond the depths of these documents. Between carefully worded lines, a different story spelled out, one where race was an unspoken barrier. Despite Joe Louis's fame and proposed value as a businessman, a series of reasons emerged that seemed all too superficial: bad timing, potentially damaging to the company's image, political implications, but all of these were mere smokescreen. The truth was blunt. Joe Louis was Black. See, what you need to understand is at the time, Joe Louis was arguably the most famous Black man on the planet, perhaps the most famous American. Boxing was the premier sport. In June 22nd of 1938, the fight between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling echoed across the globe in front of 70,000 spectators at Yankee Stadium and another 100 million that would tune in on radio, marking the largest radio audience ever for a single event. Louis had previously lost to Max Schmeling in 1936, a major upset that shocked the world. The rematch was highly anticipated and loaded with expectation that went beyond the sport of boxing. For African Americans, Louis symbolized a powerful rebuttal against racial prejudice and the assertion of Black excellence. For Americans as a whole, it symbolized a stand against the fascist ideologies. So when Louis knocked out Schmeling in 2 minutes and 4 seconds in the first round, the victory was celebrated as a triumph of American values over the oppressive doctrines emanating from Nazi Germany. The fight also played a significant role in Louis's life and career. Recollections from Louis and those close to him highlight the immense pressure and the symbolic weight that he carried into the ring. Louis would comment later, "I knew that I had to get Schmeling good. I had my own personal reasons, and the whole damn country was relying on me." This sentiment was echoed in historical accounts, which described the nationwide jubilation that followed the victory. In his later years, reflecting on the immense impact of that event, Joe Louis's manager, John Roxbury, noted that it's not often that one man's achievement can change the tide of history. Joe did that. Within the Black community, Joe Louis was put on a pedestal that is unmatched. Beginning in 1935 with his victory over Italian boxer Primo Carnera, in a twisted sense of racial narrative, this bout symbolized Ethiopia's fight against Mussolini's Italy. Maya Angelou dedicated an entire chapter to that night in her autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Langston Hughes would write, "No one else in the United States has ever had such an effect on the Negro's emotions or mind." Martin Luther King would recount a heartbreaking story of a condemned man. As gas filled the gas chamber, he would cry out, "Save me, Joe Louis." These victories were not just about sports. It was about uplifting the entire race, and his boxing matches were not just battling a human opponent, but they were battling the stereotypes and injustices of the entire race. Despite his apolitical public image crafted by his managers, Louis was actually quite active in civil rights. During World War II, he refused to box in segregated army camps and intervened when Jackie Robinson faced discrimination in the army. He also made sure that clubs in Britain where U.S. soldiers visited were not off limits to Black soldiers. And additionally, he organized a benefit concert to support Isaac Woodard, a Black veteran who was brutally beaten by the police. However, the scene inside Ford's corporate offices was tense. Many executives, especially those from the South, were against Lewis due to the widespread racism in those areas. They feared that if a black man got a dealership, customers might boycott Ford, especially those in the South where racist beliefs were particularly strong. They feared that breaking racial barriers would jeopardize Ford's financial and social standing, and worried about how President Harry Truman's civil rights policies would influence their decision. But many executives just simply remained mired in their own prejudicial views. Some of them cited Joe Louis' alleged support of activist Paul Robeson, using that to amplify their negative sentiment. However, the core of their resistance lay not with Joe Louis's public controversies, but in their inability to see past his race. In their eyes, once Joe Louis exchanged his boxing gloves for a suit, his accolades had no significance. You have to understand that this was an era where a black man's success in any field was viewed with suspicion and disdain. And despite Joe Louis's towering reputation and invaluable contributions during World War II, his skin color was a hurdle that many in Ford were not ready to overlook. So when these letters were exchanged amongst Ford's regional and district managers, they revealed deep-seated fear. They were worried about losing customers, the reaction from other dealers, the inevitable backlash from sectors of society steeped in racism. And while no one would say this publicly, Joe Louis's dealership was a threat to the status quo. They only referred to Joe Louis as this man, focusing not on his abilities, but what giving him a dealership might symbolize. They were afraid that it would set a dangerous precedent, feeling like it might force them to give opportunities to other black businessmen in the future. One regional manager wrote, "It would definitely set a precedent that might be difficult to combat in future years. The consensus among these dealers is that it might set a precedent that would demand for other similar appointments in the future and compel us to appoint others." And the writer is afraid of the reaction that it would have in the South and many other sectors in the country. However, the real fear was of competition. Keeping black businessmen out meant keeping power in white hands. Underneath their polite corporate words, the message was clear. They were scared to share power with people of color, even if it was someone as respected as Joe Louis. As the years went by, and laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 began to change America, Joe Louis never got to enjoy these changes himself. He retired as a boxing champion, but was followed by his financial issues. The IRS chased him for unpaid taxes, and with little options, Joe had to keep boxing. He lost his last match in 1951 and additionally had issues with drug addiction. Joe Louis spent his last years working as a greeter for Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas before passing away in 1981 at the age of 66. Meanwhile, Max Schmeling, Joe Louis's former opponent, was given a special license to distribute Coca-Cola in northern Germany, and he lived a long, wealthy, respected life and died at the age of 99. Joe Louis was greeting guests at a casino, while Max Schmeling found success at Coca-Cola. Just shows how differently their lives turned out. Ford executives' fears showed the sad truth. The fight for equality is extremely hard and fraught with challenges, and Joe Louis fought them bravely on multiple fronts. For Ford, they would integrate the dealerships until many years later after the Civil Rights Act. Since then, like other car companies, Ford has made efforts to have more diverse dealerships, even though these efforts haven't been particularly successful. As of 2019, according to the National Association for Minority Auto Dealers, only 5.2% of dealerships were owned by people of color. Out of 3,173 dealerships, only 56 were owned by Black people. Thank you. This has been the story of Joe Louis versus Ford. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at OneMikeHistory.com. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by my coffee Patreon page in the description below. I'd like to thank all my Patreon subscribers and my YouTube members. Without you, none of this could be possible. And I love you. Peace.